my water just broke. I felt like things really intensified.
She was right there and she was coming.
It was an amazing feeling.
I'm going to cry just thinking about it. I could feel her head.
We heard her cry. We were squeezing hands and she was screaming.
I'm Bryn Hunt Palmer, and you're listening to The Birth Hour. This podcast is designed as a safe place to come together and share childbirth stories. Stick around and join us to hear informative and empowering birth journeys from all over the world. This episode is in partnership with Motif Medical. Motif designs insurance-eligible products for busy moms. With a focus on innovation and empowerment, Motif's line of breast pumps and maternity compression garments are sophisticated yet discreet and made to support mothers as they navigate new motherhood. Discover why moms are reporting more milk in less time with the Luna breast pump and see how you can get it covered through insurance at motifmedical.com/birthhour. You'll also see their other products there like the Aura Glow, which is their new wearable pump that I discussed at the end of this episode with lactation consultant Jackie. We talk about what makes this wearable unique and how it compares to the Luna, and it's really just a great conversation, so be sure to listen to that at the end of this episode. Before we get to today's birth story, I want to talk a little bit about our online childbirth course. It's called Know Your Options, and this is the course you've been looking for if you just have that gut feeling that you know you should be taking a childbirth course, but maybe the one that's being offered to you by your care provider is not exactly what you're looking for. It might be more catered towards the type of birth they want you to have versus making you informed of all your different options and how to address different things that happen in birth, because as this podcast has shown us, birth is very unpredictable. So we would love to have you check out our 12-module course. You can go to thebirthhour.com/course to see detailed outlines of what is included in the course. You will also get a bonus course called Beyond the First Latch that is an additional 6 modules all about pumping, feeding your baby, going back to paid work if that's part of your plan. And we have a special coupon code for you. It's 100OFF for $100 off enrollment. Again, that's thebirthhour.com/course. Another way you can get involved with the Birth Hour community is by joining our Patreon. This is where you pledge your support of the Birth Hour at $5 a month or more, and you get perks in return, like access to all of our archived episodes. That's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of episodes. We've been putting out birth stories since 2015, and those are all available in our archives via Patreon. And you also get access to our private Facebook community, which is a really great group of people who are there to support you, become friends, and just encourage you on this journey through parenthood. So find out more about that at patreon.com/birthhour. Today's birth story guest is Josie, and she has 3 stories to share. She had a hospital birth, and then a birth center birth, and then a home birth with actually the same midwife from her birth center birth. So it's a really fun episode today. Let's hear from Josie. Hi, Josie. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. We have a lot to get to today, but before we do that, will you tell listeners a little bit about you and your family?
Sure. Well, my name is Joanna Clark, but most people call me Josie, so that's why we're going to call me Josie on this podcast today. I live in the Bay Area of California, specifically the city of Richmond. I live here with my husband of almost 13 years. His name is Dave, and our 3 girls, Jay, who is 7, Justice is 5, Juliana is 3, and our favorite fur baby, Montana, who's 9. He's a golden doodle, but not living in our home anymore, but was still a big part of our family is our son, Pablo, who we gained through fostering when he was 14 years old. He's now 25. I'm a physical therapist by profession. When I have time to function in that capacity, I do that. And I'm also a birth doula with a handful of births under my belt.
All right. Very cool. Okay. Well, we're going to hear all those stories today. So why don't you take us back to your journey to getting pregnant with your first?
Okay. Sounds good. So Dave and I, we got married in 2011, and we thought that we didn't want to get pregnant in the first year. But at the same time, we weren't doing anything to really prevent it. Initially, we said that we were going to have 7 children at the beginning, but that's all changed now. When we got married, we were both 34, so kind of older when we finally got hitched. But we decided finally that at the end of 2012 that we would actively try to conceive, but nothing was really happening. I don't even think that I knew exactly how pregnancy worked. Like the time of conception is like during your ovulating phase. And I don't think I really understood that right then. But as I kept going through the months and kept seeing the negative pregnancy tests and everything, I was starting to get a little worried about it. So I started looking up things to kind of figure out how to get pregnant, basically. And it ended up going into a couple of years of trying to figure that out. And it felt kind of difficult just because I had people around me who were getting pregnant and everything. And so watching them get pregnant, and I still was not even having like even a sign of pregnancy. Not that I wanted to have like a miscarriage or anything, but I just didn't have anything to give me proof that I was able or capable of being pregnant. Just kind of felt lonely in that part. It was finally in May, I think, of 2014, like I finally got to this point, because at first I was just like mad at God, like, why would you let this happen? We really want children, but I'm not having a sign that I can do this. And so I finally got to this point where I was like, Lord, like however you want me to parent, I'm available, whether that's through adoption or foster or whatever. And that was a Thursday when I had that prayer. And then I signed up for a crisis foster parent system that day. Like right after that, I didn't even talk to Dave about it. I just went on and signed up for it. And then a teacher friend of ours who had a student who was coming to our youth program at our church, his family was going through a crisis, and she just reached out to us to ask if we would consider taking him in for just like a week, just until his family got themselves out of the crisis. And so we agreed to it, and that week turned into 4 years and really continues to this day. So we saw him through his high school time. That's Pablo, who I'm speaking of.
Yeah.
We saw him all through his high school years. He stayed with us and he became our actual foster care like some months later. But that's how it was just like, can you house him for a couple of days?
Oh, okay.
He ended up staying with us for 4 years. So that was my first introduction to being a parent.
Wow.
Was this 14-year-old coming into our family. And it wasn't easy, just because he had already been living life for 14 years and had his way of doing things. And we just had to figure out taking care of a teenager. And, it was good. And we definitely have been blessed. So that was 2014. And it's funny, too, because I also said that I didn't want to have a dog until I had a baby. But that wasn't happening. So I was like, well, let's go ahead and get a baby. So in 2015, with Pablo here, we got a dog, too. So that was my first parenting, was a teenager and a dog. At the same time, I was still trying to understand this whole pregnancy and how it works. And we didn't really have, at the time, conventional insurance. We had this co-op insurance thing. I can't remember what it was named, and I didn't really know how to navigate healthcare with it. So I didn't pursue, seeking out a doctor and everything. And it wasn't until I think later in 2014 when I started working as a home health PT. I started getting more income, so we ended up purchasing insurance and found a OB through a friend's recommendation that took the new insurance that I had. And so I was about 37 at this point, and the doctor ended up having us both, Dave and I, go through a series of tests to try to, figure out if there was any challenges or anything that was going on inside of us that might be preventing us from getting pregnant. So Dave had his sperm checked. I had a hysterosalpingogram. I think that's how you pronounce it. HSG, I think, is what they say it for short.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't heard that one either.
It's where they take x-rays of your uterus and the fallopian tubes, and they check to see if there's any blockages.
Do they do the dye too?
Yes,
okay.
It's a dye, yeah. And so Dave's test actually showed up some concerns, like I think he might have had low motility or something like that. And then my results came back, but my doctor didn't read them, didn't read the results. And we never had a follow-up discussion about what was actually found. But there was actually a cyst that was in my uterus. And I didn't see the results until about a year later when I had begun to pursue IVF with another doctor. And we had a consultation before we started anything. And he said he had asked for all the results from all the tests that we had. He said, you have a cyst in your uterus, and we won't be able to do any IVF until you get that removed. And so I went on to call my doctor who had ordered that HSG or whatever it's called. And she said that she didn't notice that before. So she was like, okay, well, let's get that on schedule. So we finally got it on schedule to get it removed. And it was a significant size, actually. It was pretty big. And I don't know if that was just blocking it, but she wanted to get it out so that maybe that might relieve the ability to be able to get pregnant. And so we had that scheduled for the end of January, I believe, of 2016. So had the cyst removed, and she said if nothing happens in the next couple of months following the removal, that we would try a round of IUI. So that's intrauterine insemination. And so nothing happened over the next couple months. So I contacted the doctor, and I think it was like towards the end of March. And she said, okay, let's get it scheduled for when you have your next positive ovulation test. And that happened around like the first week of April of that year. And so I had to go it was on a Saturday because I think I had the positive on Friday. And so she wanted me to come on Saturday. And I had a sample of Dave's semen, brought it with me, took it to the OB's nurse at one of her offices, and she centrifuged the specimen to parse out what they would actually inseminate. And then I traveled from the one office to the other office with the sample close to my chest because they wanted me to keep it warm. And the OB met me at the other office and performed the procedure. And then there was like this 2-week wait, which that was like hard because I was like, anxious to get pregnant and wasn't sure if this was going to work or anything. But I had, people praying for me, and everyone knew that this was what we wanted, but also that this was happening and praying that this would happen. And it's funny because the night before the ovulation test, we had actually had sex that night. And so I was just like wondering if maybe that'll work and maybe the IUI will work. I don't know which one was going to work. So anyway, and my cycle was pretty regular. So when I started spotting at the time when it was expected to come. And so I was like, dang, it didn't work, which I typically, spot a little bit before the actual flow. And so it was a Thursday morning, I remember, and I woke up and I was spotting. I was like, dang, didn't work. And so I told Dave that morning he was leaving out to go take somebody to school, and some friends of ours needed him to take him to school. And I was like, I think my period's about to start. And he was a little bit sad. I remember him being a little bit sad because, we had just gone through this procedure with hopes that it would work. And it seemed like it hadn't. And so I took a test anyway after he left, and it turns out it was positive. And I was so shocked and unsure because it was like the faintest line.
Mm-hmm.
And I had never seen a positive test before.
Right. Yeah.
So it was just like, what? I was flabbergasted. And so I called Dave immediately because I couldn't contain it anymore. And there was no way that I was not going to be able to tell him. And so I called and he didn't believe me because he was so disappointed from earlier. And he was just confused. He was like, wait, what? It's positive? And so when he came home, I had to go out. I had to go get a couple more tests because I needed to assure myself of the positive. And I think I took about 5 tests or so because it was just so unbelievable that whatever worked, whether it was the sex or it was the IUI, I don't know. It worked. And so I called the doctor and told her that I had a positive pregnancy test. And then they were like, you don't need to come in till about the 8th week or the 9th week. So they scheduled me out. But I was just like, I feel like for a first time pregnancy, they need you to come in just to assure you that everything's okay. But they had me to wait till the 8th or 9th week. I can't remember which one it was, but I started second guessing myself. Like, am I having symptoms, or I felt this yesterday and now I'm not feeling anymore? So I was still having a hard time believing that I was actually pregnant. And so I had a friend who was a doctor, and she was able to get me in for lab work to see if my HCG levels were doubling over, I think, the course of 2 days or so. And it turns out that it was doubling. So that was a good sign that it seemed like the pregnancy was viable. That helped ease my mind. But then also another friend, she just ended up telling me, she said to believe that I was pregnant until some other fact proved otherwise. And that helped me to feel more okay until I got to the doctor's office. And even though it was early on, I know some people want to hold the information in. If it's early in the pregnancy, they don't want to share because they're worried that they might miscarry or have some other worries about sharing too early. Mm-hmm. But for me, I just felt like I didn't want to go through a loss alone.
Yeah.
And everyone was praying for us that we would have a baby. So they would be excited to know that we were pregnant, and they would be with me if something should happen. And so I was telling everybody and everyone was excited, of course. And I just asked them to keep praying that the pregnancy would last. And it did. So that's how I found out that I was pregnant the first time.
Okay. So then how did your pregnancy go? And what type of birth were you planning?
Pregnancy went well for the most part. I did have nausea probably right at 6 weeks. So somewhere in that time between getting into that first appointment and the nausea started. And it was pretty strong. But it did, and I was thinking it would just be the first trimester. That's what everyone said. Oh, just be once you get into the second trimester, it'll go on. But for me, it lasted probably all the way till the beginning of the third trimester. I felt like I never threw up or anything. It was just nausea. And that was very tiring for me. And I was thinking that I wasn't going to have any morning sickness at all, just because my mother and my sisters, none of them had morning sickness. And so I was thinking I would be a part of that club, but no, not my case. And so I would say that was the biggest challenge of the pregnancy was the nausea. And another challenge, though, that I did have that wasn't as hard to deal with was I had a rib kind of displaced, and I'm not even sure how it happened. I don't know if I sneezed wrong or laid wrong incorrectly, but it would hurt when I would breathe. So someone referred me to a chiropractor, and she was amazing. And for that first visit, she was able to clear the rib and get it back into place. And I just loved going to see her from then on, just that table that they have you on where you can lay on your stomach and it just feels like weightless. I just enjoyed going to the chiropractor from then on for leading up to the birth. And those were like my two biggest challenges. I felt good. I felt like I looked good, everything.
Awesome.
I loved my bump. I loved going out for walks when I could and walking the dog and all that stuff. And that was all that I enjoyed about my pregnancy. So anyway, I just felt good after getting the rib back in place. And then once the nausea subsided, everything started to feel good. As far as preparing for the type of birth that I wanted, I think somewhere in there, I watched The Business of Being Born. And that convinced me, that watching that documentary convinced me that I did not want Pitocin. I did not want to be induced. I was like kind of side-eyeing the doctor for like, do you really have my best interest in mind? I don't know. I was just really, the OB that facilitated my IUI, I ended up staying with her for care too throughout my pregnancy. But after watching that, I was, like, just, do I trust her? I wasn't really sure about it, but I ended up watching that. And then I also started listening to The Birth Hour.
Yay.
One of my friends was a guest on your show. Her name is Brandy. That would have been in the middle of June or so. And she was actually pregnant too. We were pregnant at the same time. but she had shared her story. And that was my first time knowing that there was a podcast that talked about birth stories or anything like that. And I just fell in love with the stories on there and just hearing the differences between different people's labor and births and all that stuff, that it kind of was in the same vein to me as watching The Business of Being Born, and just the information that I was getting. It was just getting me excited. And so I started to look for a class that would help me achieve the goal that I wanted, which was to have a physiological birth. I didn't want to be induced. I didn't want, Pitocin. I didn't want any intervention, basically, because I was really wanting to avoid having like a C-section or anything like that. So I found a childbirth class. They advertised it as wanting to work towards a natural birth or a physiological birth, but understanding birth and all that stuff. And so Dave and I attended that class, and it was really good. I think that's who I learned about the chiropractor from. They talked about spinning babies. They talked about getting baby in position, and talked about all the stuff the interventions that could be given should I go into the hospital and everything. And I loved hearing this stuff, but I feel like I didn't really understand everything because I hadn't gone through the actual act of labor and birth. I felt like it was good information. I felt like it was pushing me towards the goal that I had. I just didn't house it, if that makes sense. I just didn't have the experience of going through it yet. So I think looking back on it, I feel like after the birth, I could look back on the information and say, oh, I get what they were trying to say, but it just still didn't click at the time that I was going through the class. So I don't know. I just feel like there was a better way to communicate the information to help me go through the birth better.
Yeah, maybe it was being taught with just kind of like a assumption that you already had a lot of information that you just didn't have. All right, well, let's go ahead and talk about how labor started for you.
Yeah, so my due date was the 31st of December, and that came and went. And even though it was third trimester, I had so much energy. I was painting rooms, and we had to convert the garage to a room for Pablo. We had somebody come in and install the floor to the nursery, putting nursery furniture together. A whole week went by after my due date. I think I went in for a checkup. So that would have been 40 weeks and 7 days, I think. And I wasn't having any signs of labor. Nothing was happening. Nothing was happening, literally. I believe at that appointment, though, my blood pressure was a little bit elevated. So they sent me over to the hospital for a non-stress test. And I had done just about all my visits without Dave. I don't know why. I was just like, I can do this. I don't know. I'm not a single parent, but I was acting like I was. Didn't invite him to any. I think he went to one visit, and that was like right before this last visit. But he wasn't there. But she had sent me over to the hospital, and I called him crying because I was thinking that they were about to send me over for an induction. I was nervous because my blood pressure was up and all that stuff. So they just did the non-stress test, which was just checking to see how my contractions were, if I was contracting, how my blood pressure was doing, how was the baby doing, and everything was fine. Like my blood pressure came back down. They were noting that I was having contractions, and they were like, you can't feel that. I was like, no, I don't feel anything. I couldn't feel anything, but they were like, well, you might be one of those ones who you can't feel anything until, or you might not feel anything. I was like, oh, that'd be great. But that wasn't the case. So they ended up just sending me home. And the doctor called me later and said, well, you might have this baby sometime this weekend. We don't know. But if you don't have it by next Wednesday, so that was a Friday. If you don't have it by next Wednesday, we'll go ahead and get you in for an induction. I was like, that she did not need to say that because that's what I'm trying to avoid. So I tried to put that out of my head and just go about doing whatever I needed to get done. And it was raining that time of the year. For some reason, it had been pretty dry the years prior, but for some reason, this rainy season was actually super rainy. And the rain was heavy over the next 2 days. And that Sunday, it rained so hard. And, you know, we did all the normal stuff we do on Sunday, which is church and hang out with friends afterwards. And we went to a friend's house that night for a movie. And he has like this huge sound system that like super loud. And we were joking around like maybe the sound system will get the baby coming. But nothing happened during the movie, of course. And we walked home from his house, which is a couple blocks down. And the rain was light during that time while we were walking home. And that was around 11 o'clock. And so when I get home, I was like, well, let me just go ahead on the bed, took a shower to kind of relax myself. And just as I was lifting my leg up into the bed, I heard a little pop and a little gush came out. And I ran to the bathroom as soon as I could to eliminate, and I was able to eliminate. And I was thinking, that must be my water. And, you know, first time mom, as soon as that happened, I was like, what do I do? It was like, I forgot all the plans that I had made about if your water breaks, take your time. You don't have to rush immediately unless there's, you know, something in the fluid or whatever. I was like, I forgot everything that I was supposed to do. So I just called the hospital. And they were like, yeah, come on in. You can get checked. Of course, they want me to come in. So they said, come on in. Let's just get checked, make sure that is what it was. So we packed up everything. I mean, nothing's happening. There's no contractions or anything happening. So we went on in. And again, there were contractions on the monitor, but I wasn't feeling anything. And because I was strep B positive, they thought that I should stay. They wanted me to stay. And also, I guess the clock was running now because my water had broke. And so they ended up giving me misoprostol, I think it is. And I think I was only about 4 centimeters or so when I came in. But again, I'm not feeling any contractions, but they gave me the misoprostol, I think is what it's called. And nothing really happened until the middle of the next day. And my doctor was calling to the nurses and saying, why haven't we gotten Pitocin started? All the stuff that I didn't want to happen. She started asking about that and started really pushing for me to have the Pitocin. But I was trying to walk and get things going, but nothing was really going. I had some friends come in to kind of help support because I didn't have a doula or anything. I just asked some friends to come and help. However they could. I would taught them like how to do hip squeezes and all these other things. But the nurses were like kind. They were like, your doctor's pushing for this Pitocin, so you better get moving. Or they just kept trying to have me move to kind of help get labor going. But nothing was really happening. I was walking through the hospital and all the people were like, oh, look at you, you're going. But I think they knew that, I mean, I wasn't hurting. I wasn't feeling anything. They were like, oh, she got a long way to go. I felt like that was their facial expressions. I finally got to a point where it had been 24 hours since my water had broke. I don't think I was progressing much as far as dilation is concerned. I might have been maybe at a 4, still at a 4. And so my doctor was like, we need to get this going. So she finally persisted, and I finally said, okay, let's do the Pitocin. And so through the middle of the night, that's when the contractions really, I was feeling them, and they were so difficult to cope with. Like immediately, it felt like I wasn't able to breathe through them or anything. It was just, they were having me dance with Dave. They were having me get in the shower. They were having me do all these things. And I remember just like trying to muscle my way through all of the contractions. And I felt like that just made it worse. And so I ended up just saying, look, this isn't working. This isn't helping. And my sister had texted with Dave and told him, she was like, he was giving her updates throughout the pregnancy or throughout the labor. And she said, tell Josie to get the epidural because she needs to rest to help open up. And so it won't get to the point of needing a C-section or something like that. And I trust my sister. I feel like I look up to her as like the birther of all birthers. And so when she said that, when she gave me permission to have the epidural, I was like, okay, let's get it. And so got the epidural. I agreed to it. And I remember falling asleep like soon after that because the pressure and the pain or what I was feeling as pain was gone. And I got to sleep for about 3 or 4 hours. It was like the morning of January 10th by this time. I woke up and I was like, oh, I feel so much better. And it wasn't too long after that they were like, oh, she's complete. That was around 9 something that morning. And the baby was even showing D cells at the time, but responded well to like position changes and them giving me oxygen. Once they saw that I was complete and baby was okay, they were like, we started pushing. They kept saying I was doing well, but she just kept coming down so far and then she would go back up. She'd keep coming down and go back up. Mind you, we didn't know what she was at the time because we chose not to find out that she was a girl. Another thing that was happening at the same time, we had called my in-laws when we went into the hospital at first because my father had had a heart attack a couple months before. And so my mother wasn't able to come and be with us, which they had typically done with both of my sisters. Whenever they had babies, they would go and be with them. But they weren't able to come out here to Chicago. So we had asked my mother-in-law to step in that way. And so she had gotten her ticket and she was expected to arrive on the 10th that morning. And she ended up being brought from the airport to the hospital thinking she was going to see a baby, but I was still pushing. So I had been pushing for about 2 hours already when she showed up. So she was there to be for the last hour. And I was like, come on in. I couldn't feel anything. I had no qualms about her being in there or anything. So she ended up witnessing me actually finally get to push the baby out. During that time also, when my mother-in-law got to the hospital, the doctor came in too and was saying, okay, we might have to take this to a C-section if we don't get the baby out in the next hour. And so I guess that motivated me to really push hard. And so in the next hour, finally, she was getting to the point of crowning, but it was like she still couldn't get out. So the doctor was like, okay, we're going to do a vacuum and get her out. So she used the vacuum. And I remember watching her put the head of the vacuum onto the head. And I saw her lift up a knife or a scalpel or whatever they use to do an episiotomy. And so she's doing the vacuum and the episiotomy at the same time. And Jay came out like really quickly from that. And she was on my chest right away. So that was after 36 hours of labor and 3 hours of pushing, she was finally out. And that's how she came into the world. One thing to note, after they were finally stitching me up and everything, the doctor was stitching me up from the episiotomy and her birth, my doctor came in and was like, I should have threatened you with a C-section a long time ago. And I was just like, I don't think that's the thing you want to say to somebody when
That's not a good joke, even if you're joking. Yeah.
I was like, this is like the third thing that I was like, okay, I won't be using you anymore.
Yeah.
The immediate postpartum was great. They had her on my chest for 2 hours and we didn't get to be moved to my recovery room until after that. I was just in bliss. It was just great. We're glad to have her here after the time of, trying to get pregnant. And now she's here. That was awesome. They kept telling me to get rest. I could not sleep. I could not stop staring at her. My mother-in-law, she was the best. Once we got home, she just took care of me so well so that I could just worry about taking care of Jay, who ended up being a girl. Jay Clark is her name. She just fed me, all that stuff. And I will note this because this is different than my other two. There was no direction about how should I do with postpartum. It was just the only thing that they said was if you move a lot, you may bleed more. That's it. No information, no why does that happen or anything. And I did move a little bit too much right after. I was out at the DMV a week after getting home.
Oh, it's not where you want to be.
On my feet, registering the car. I'm like, what am I doing? Looking back on it. But there was no, direction on that. So I traveled to Chicago at 6 weeks to introduce her to my parents and my family in Chicago. I had no problems with breastfeeding. I felt like they gave me I had a good nurse at the hospital to help with the introduction to the breast. And we had a 18-month breastfeeding journey with Jay. So that's how it all went down.
All right. Well, yeah, let's go ahead and we got 2 more stories to get to. So let's go ahead and talk about your next pregnancy and birth.
Okay. So a year and a half after Jay was born is when we planned to get pregnant. And we weren't sure if how it would work, if it would be difficult as it was the first time. And after we were actively trying to get pregnant, we got pregnant the first go round, the first month. So I guess we were cleared, like all the stuff before Jay was born helped to work to clear the way for the rest of my pregnancies, because it was like that for both of the next two. Same thing after getting pregnant, just nausea was probably the biggest challenge. But what I was going to do different was I was not going to have that same doctor again. I didn't want her anymore. I was just convinced that she was not right for me. So I ended up looking for a different caregiver this time. And I looked on Yelp for a birth center in our area. And I found this one that's across one of the bridges here in San Rafael. And I was like, Dave and I, let's go visit this place. Let's see what it was. And it was the only place that I visited. And Kiki, my midwife, was the first midwife that I had met with. And I loved her. And I appreciated throughout this pregnancy the longer visits. I felt like she was in tune with like my emotional well-being. We had a difficult time this was another challenge. It was a pretty big challenge too, but my father-in-law had ended up committing suicide. I was probably about 6 months pregnant.
Oh my gosh.
So we had to rush back to the Midwest to deal with remembering him. And I remember once we returned back here, Kiki, I didn't tell her what happened, but she's like, what is going on? I sense a shift or something. And it was just grief. It was what I was dealing with. And I just appreciated the care that I was receiving. It was different, definitely different, more all-encompassing of all of who I am, not just this pregnancy, but just emotional, physical.
Holistic care, I feel like.
Holistic, that's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I really appreciated that. The last month before I was due, I ended up hurting my hip pretty bad. I was trying to keep Jay from falling out of a chair or out of a swing. And I went to take a step and I just stepped pretty badly. And I don't know if I jammed my hip or what, but I could not walk without crutches for a couple weeks. I ended up going to the chiropractor. This time it didn't work. I ended up going to a physical therapy, one of the places I used to work at. And I worked with a therapist who had worked with pregnancies before. And we worked on my walk. She sent me to aquatic therapy. And that was what worked this time. So we just worked on some imbalances that I was having in my hips, and that got me ready for that last month right before I had the baby. My midwife, she told me that she expected that this birth would probably not be as long as the last one. Like I said, that one was 36. And she said, just be mindful that because I was across the bridge from the birth center at the time of day, just to be mindful of when the traffic is and try to beat the traffic. Even if the contractions are not as strong or as close or whatever, instead of 5 minutes apart, maybe 6 minutes apart or something like that. She wanted me to just not have to be concerned about like getting there and having the baby in the car versus, getting to the birth center.
Sounds like a good instinct.
So I had a visit with her on my due date. I think it was January 30th or something like that. We reviewed what we were looking for, how to prepare to call her if something should happen, if my water breaks. And so I went about my business. We were this was always my attitude each time, or except for the first one, but it's just go about your business and the baby will come when the baby comes. And so my mother-in-law came in town on that Monday night and she was like, I think you're ready. And I was like, okay, I don't know. We'll see. And she went on to bed. I was doing some cleaning up around the house and I was like, okay, let me just go ahead and get in bed. And just the same thing that happened the last time. As I was getting into bed, my water breaks.
Oh my gosh.
And this time, though, I was like, I know what to do. I didn't even call Kiki. I just waited to see if any contractions were going, and Dave was asleep. I let him sleep. And once the contractions did start, which was about an hour or so later, I called Kiki and let her know. And she again said, just be mindful. Try to get on that bridge before the traffic starts at 6 o'clock. You need to, come in before that if it progresses throughout the night. And she said, I'm going to get ready to go over and get the room ready for you just in case. And so I just labored through the night, and I had read this book this time around Natural Childbirth, the Bradley Way. And I didn't even read the whole book, but one of the chapters, I think towards the beginning, was just talking about relaxing through the contractions and picturing yourself being on a wave. And as the contraction goes out, you're going out to sea. And as it's coming back down, you're coming back to land or whatever. And so I was just doing that throughout the night. And I would just make sure to consciously relax all of my muscles as the contraction was building up. I would just go limp on my bed on my side. And I just did that all throughout the night. Jay even woke up. I went over there and I rocked her in the chair back to sleep. And even as I was contracting, I would just relax into the thing. And I think that helped her go back to sleep. And then I got back into the bed and I just relaxed. And then the contractions were picking up. And I called Kiki again, and she said, all right, you should probably think about coming in. I was like, okay, I'm going to take a shower first and then and then come on in. I was not about to rush and get over there like I had done the last time. I get in the shower. The shower was hot. It felt so good. I get out of the shower and I start to throw up. I was like, I think it's time for us to go. And meanwhile, it's 7 o'clock, which means we're going to be in traffic. So my mother-in-law got up. She was like, yes, go. I think you need to go too. So we get on the road and we're heading out and we hit the traffic. And it seems like at first that there's not going to be traffic, but then we hit the traffic. And I was like, Dave, get in the shoulder, go on the shoulder. And he's like, no, I can't do that. And it turns out that the shoulder ran out a little bit, so he wouldn't have done it. So I just closed my eyes and I practiced the whole relaxing thing as I was going in. And I tried to picture where we would be without opening my eyes, because if I opened my eyes, it was going to get worse. And so we finally got to the birth center. I opened the door and Kiki was standing up on the balcony. And she's like, oh, you made it. And I start throwing up. She said, oh, it sounds pretty serious. And so I throw up into my little bag. I had an emesis bag with me, throw up into that. And as soon as the contraction was over, I ran up the stairs and I got to the top of the stairs and a contraction came and I stopped. And I waited out the contraction. I tried to relax while I was standing. That was pretty much impossible. But anyway, I got in there, finally sat on the ball. And she said, do you want me to check you? And I was like, actually, I do. And I was so afraid that it was going to be still not very far along. But she checked and I was a 9.5. I was like, whoa, I did it. But I still had to get the baby out. And so what we ended up doing was I went through a couple of contractions on the ball and just bearing down into her shoulders. And then I said I wanted to get in the bath. And we got into the bath. And it was like a bathtub, like an oval-shaped bathtub. And it had no grips on the bottom or anywhere to kind of like get my bearing. These contractions were really hard to cope with. And I had my eyes closed. And I could hear Kiki in the room, but she was like off to the other side doing something. And she was like, breathe, breathe. Make sure you breathe. And I was trying to breathe, but I was breathing and pushing. It was starting to push. My body was just automatically doing it, but I couldn't get my bearings. And it was just, I didn't like being in the water. So, and she didn't like what she was hearing either. So she was listening to the baby and she couldn't hear what she wanted to hear. So she was like, I need you to get out of this tub. So we got out of the tub and she sat me on a birth stool. And she was like, she got in my face. My friend was behind me. Dave was behind me. Dave had his head in my back. He said he was praying that he epidural for me right now because he was like, oh no, what's happening? And Kiki had also asked the other midwife to call the ambulance because she didn't like what she was hearing. She said, call them to be on standby. And she got down in my face and she said, I need you to do all that you can to push this baby out right now. And so I was sitting on the thing and I was like, okay, let's go. And I wasn't concerned, even though I heard her call to ask for the ambulance. I heard her call that in the corner, but I was not afraid. I trusted her so much that I was just like, okay, let's do this. So we get down on the birth stool and I'm pushing out and I push out her head. And she was like, okay, I need you to get on the bed. So I was like, wait a minute, what? Can we just push her out? She had me get up with this little ball and it just felt like a little bowling ball between my legs, get on my back so she could help assist get her out because she was really concerned. But I didn't pick up on that concern. I just did what she told me to do. And we got baby girl out. Turns out we knew that this was a girl. So Justice came out. From the time that we got to the birth center to the time she was born was about 2 hours. So from 7:45 was when we got to the birth center to 9:45 was when she was out. As soon as she came out, I was like, I could do this again. I don't know why I thought that, but I did. So that's how that happened. We were back home within like 4 hours or so. And I feel like the hardest part of postpartum with Justice was learning how to sleep with a baby and a toddler. We have a small house, a 2-bedroom house, and I just could not figure that out for some reason. And it ended up being okay, but that was probably the biggest challenge, was figuring out how to sleep with a toddler and a baby.
Okay, well, we have one more baby on the way here, so...
Yes, so 2020 was when we decided that we were ready for another. But at this point, things had changed. We were in a pandemic. The birth center that we had Justice at was closed, and I couldn't find Kiki anywhere. They wouldn't tell me what her forward information was, and so I couldn't find her. And so I proceeded to look for a OB, and I was thinking maybe I would look for a Black OB to help me with this birth. Because I was getting more information, I was starting to learn more about like the maternal health crisis as it related to Black women. And I had gone through doula training, and I was just like, maybe the best fit for me this go round would be to find a Black OB.
Yeah, definitely.
So I found one, and I never met her. I only worked with her nurse practitioner. I met with her 2 times, and I liked her. She was really nice and everything. I ended up going to get lab work done that she had sent me out to do. And they didn't have my information in the system. They didn't have the order, even though I had made this appointment and everything. And then when the lab technician was calling to the office, they couldn't get in touch with anybody because the lines were busy or something was not allowed. And I was just like, this is too much. And every time I would go to the doctor's office too, it would be such a long line, and it would take forever for me to be seen. So I was like, I can't do this. I don't want to go see this person anymore. So I just went to Google, and I just Googled Kiki's name and midwife, and she showed up in my search. And she was now at a new facility. It was called Birthland Midwifery. And like the day that I canceled the lab work, I called Kiki right away. And I was like, I found you. And she was now doing home births. So I was like, oh, okay. I don't know how I feel about that, but ended up Dave and I went and talked with her, and she just kind of eased our minds. And again, I fell more in love with my midwife, and we just began to prepare for a home birth this time around. So nothing different this time around again. Nausea was a biggest challenge. I did have some pelvic pain towards the end again. Ended up going to the chiropractor again. This time, she was excellent, helped kind of relieve that, helped me with some exercises because my PT place, they were not functioning as they had been before because of COVID. So they didn't have the aquatic therapy available to me. So The chiropractor was, and she was excellent. Again, it was pretty straightforward. I felt good. I had probably gained a little more weight than I wanted to, but that's fine. So then my mother-in-law comes in town. She came in a couple weeks earlier this time. And we were thinking, okay, so the baby's probably coming tomorrow, but that didn't happen. So she was in for about 2 weeks before Juliana actually decided to come. So one thing that was a challenge was because I was 43, about to be 44. So I got a lot more pushback, especially when I switched from the OB to the home birth midwife. The OB sent me a letter saying, I had never met her, but she was just saying because of my age that I probably shouldn't have a home birth. And when I went in for my ultrasound, they too were like, oh, when you're older, something about your blood vessels and that you can have I don't know. They were just giving me all the horror stories about being 40 plus and pregnant and having a home birth. So I was very careful about who I shared that with, because I don't think everybody was receptive to the fact that I was choosing to have a home birth this time around. But I just thanked them for their advice and kept it moving. Just put it out my mind or whatever.
Smart approach.
Yes. I'm still listening to my birth stories with you, and I'm hearing different. I think I would zero in on any home births, any stories that were about home births. I was just listening to all the home birth stories.
Yeah.
Just because this was also a new thing for me. So first sign that I was about to have the baby. Oh, I did get a doula this time too. It was a friend of mine. She was trying to get some of her hours in. So I asked her to come and support me all the way from Sacramento. She was going to come all the way out to Richmond to be with me for the home birth. So I got everything set up for the home birth. We moved our table out to the back, had our tub ready to go. And this was the day of her due date. That night, getting ready for bed, I had just mopped the floor, I think. And I think I took a shower, about to get in the bed, and my water breaks. Again, it's the same situation every time. We called Pablo. He was living in the city nearby, had him to come get Montana so that we could go through the birth without him being present. And woke up my mother-in-law, called Kiki, told her that everything was going and that my contractions started pretty much right away. So she was like, okay, I'm going to get ready and I will be right over. Called my doula. She got up and was headed our way. Woke up my mother-in-law because she didn't want to be at the house with the girls. So we had a friend nearby. They had to get up and go over to their house and go back to sleep over there. And Dave was not sure about having the girls here because he was concerned that they might not be able to handle seeing me go through the birth. But I was okay with that. So that's why they went over to our friend's house nearby. While he was taking them over to the house, Kiki shows up, my doula shows up, and I was in my room and I started to throw up. That's another sign that I'm close to time to have birth. I start throwing up and they were like, you want to get in the tub? I was like, yeah, I guess so. And I didn't think things were going to happen as fast as they did, but I get in the tub and the contractions were so strong, but the bottom of this tub had a little grip on it. And I had some handles that I could hold on to. So I felt like I could keep my bearing. And I just went in to my mind of relaxing through the contractions again. And I started to have that pushy sound. I remember feeling it and hearing it. And Kiki said the same thing. And she went to look and she said, all right, Dave, you want to come down? You want to catch? And he was like, oh, is it time? He had come back meantime. And she said, oh, is it time? Yes, it's time. So come on down here. And it was like 3 pushes and she was out. So it was about from the time that Kiki got there, about an hour later is when Juliana was born. And it was so peaceful. I had those little twinkle lights on the wall, had pictures up of the kids and Dave and family and everything. We had the music playing and the lights were like flashing off the water. And she just came on out and Kiki was like, you didn't even need me here because I didn't. It was just so peaceful. It was just so, I don't know how else to explain it other than it was just the most peaceful thing I've ever experienced. It was probably my favorite birth that I had. And then we just sat in the water for about 40 minutes or so with her up against my chest. We transitioned to the couch. She did all the stuff. Dave cut the umbilical cord. We did all the cleanup and everything and made sure that all the vitals, all that stuff was okay. And she's like, you want to get back in your bed? I was like, yeah. And we just walked over to my room and got on the bed, swaddled the baby, and she just slept right next to me and we just went to sleep. It was just so beautiful and peaceful in just about 3 hours. So I went from 36 hours for my first to 9 hours or so for labor and birth to about 3 hours with the last one.
Yeah, that last one was fast.
And again, I didn't have much postpartum. I know Kiki just gave me a little more direction just to stay in my bed for 10 days or so or close by my bed. And I just followed that. I was like, I'm not doing anything. And my mother-in-law would sit down and she just took care of all the things that need to be taken care of so I could just take care of baby and me. And that was great.
Awesome.
Yeah, nothing wrong with breastfeeding. I'm just really blessed to have good breastfeeding journeys with all three girls.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing. That was a lot to get in there.
I know.
And you did a great job of sharing resources throughout. So if you just send me links, we'll put those on the show notes. But do you want to share where people can connect with you?
Sure. Instagram is probably the best way to reach me. My handle is Josie Locks 77, and Josie Locks is spelled JOCLOCS 77. And I am private, but if you send me a direct message, if you relate it to the birth story.
All right. Well, thank you so much again for sharing, Josie.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Now I'm going to chat with Jackie from Motif Medical all about their new wearable pump. Hi, Jackie. Thank you so much for joining me to chat about the Motif breast pump line.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm excited. We have some exciting things coming.
Awesome. Well, before we get into all of that, will you tell listeners just a little bit about you and what you do at Motif Medical?
Yes, so I am a registered nurse and board certified lactation consultant, and I have the pleasure of being the clinical lactation advisor or clinical lactation specialist with Motif, which just means I get to play around with all the fun breast pumps and tell them all the things that might make the pumps and the products better for breastfeeding families, and I absolutely love it. I also work in private practice, so I still and very much, boots on the ground, helping families in their own homes right after birth or anytime in the postpartum period and the prenatal period, just helping families be more prepared for a breastfeeding journey and all the things that they might encounter.
Very cool. Well, I was lucky enough to get to use the Luna breast pump when it was pretty new. I guess 6 years ago now. My youngest just turned 6. And I talk about all the time how it was my favorite pump of all the ones I had tried, over 3 kids and everything. And then you guys came out with the hands-free pump a couple years ago. And now there's something new on the horizon. So I want to talk about the new pump that's coming out this year.
Yes, we are very excited. Just after the first of the year, we are launching the Aura Glow, which is a new wearable pump. You might remember the Aura as our original wearable pump, and it's still available, but we've got a new player on deck that I think is going to provide a lot of really sought after features, a lot of great pump quality, and something that moms I think are going to be really excited to use on a pretty regular basis as they're going back to work or just going about their lives where they need to be hands-free, need to have that wearable pump option.
Very cool. So I know you guys kind of take a lot of, I don't know, advice isn't the right word, but you take feedback. There we go. You take feedback from customers and what people are liking about pumps and things like that. So what are some of the differences with the Aura Glow that we can expect to see?
Yes, I love this question because this is why I love working with Motif, that they are so particular about taking feedback from the professional community, from the families who are using their products, and they're not just looking to pump out products that, sell. Obviously, it's a business. We need to sell things to stay in business, but the idea is to make products that actually meet needs and make pumping easier for people so that they naturally just want to buy the products, which I love that idea. And I love that we've built the Aura Glow based on feedback. So the thing I'm most excited about is the expanded flange sizing. So you get 5 flange sizes right in the box. So you get the 24 millimeter brush shield, but we also include 15 millimeter, 17 millimeter, 19 millimeter, and 21 millimeter inserts, so that right out of the box, most people are going to be able to find something that allows them to pump efficiently, effectively, and comfortably. And then if those sizes don't work, the 15 through 24 that come in the box don't work, we also have even smaller sizes, 11, 12, 13, and 14 millimeter inserts available, and then a 27 millimeter brush shield available for those that might need a larger size. So excited about that. The other things that I think set this pump apart, it's a powerful wearable. So the suction is 260 to 280 mmHg. So that's millimeters of mercury. That's how we measure that suction pressure. And that puts it on par with the suction of pumps like Luna. It's still a wearable, still something that we're going to classify as a secondary pump that we would use to complement the Luna, but it's powerful. And it has 2 pre-programmed pumping modes, which are just, I think, something that's going to make life so much easier and take a lot of the guesswork out of, what settings do I use? How do I set my pump to get the most out of it?
Yeah, the different sizing is huge. I know I tried a wearable pump with my last baby, and it was very early on in the making of these, but that did not work for me and was not comfortable. So having those different sizes is amazing. And do you guys provide some kind of guidance in the packaging, or can people reach out to help find the right size?
We do provide guidance in the packaging. That's all been updated to match the most current information we have about flange sizing. So, as I said, Motif is huge on listening to that feedback, and lactation consultants have been screaming about flange sizing for a while now, and Motif definitely has listened by including those smaller sizes and that flange sizing guidance that does fit the most current information that we have about getting the right size.
Amazing. So you also mentioned the programming modes for pumping. Can you explain a little bit about those and what's different with the Aura Glow?
Yes. So I think this is revolutionary. I love this idea. There are 2 pre-programmed pumping sessions. There is the cluster feeding mode and the general pumping mode. And you can still use the pump, just as you normally would use a breast pump. But the cluster feeding mode has these 5 levels of pumping and then pause, pumping and pause to mimic how a baby cluster feeds. So that can help increase milk supply. And without the need to do this like big, long power pumping, hour-long power pumping session. It's this 30-minute pre-programmed session that your pump will move through all by itself. And then the general pumping mode is just a way to maximize your pumping efforts a little bit by triggering a couple of letdowns. So it goes through massage mode and it stays there for 2 minutes to help trigger that letdown. Then it goes to expression mode and you get that, longer, more rhythmic, kind of mimicking how the baby suckles once your milk has let down. And then it will go back to the massage mode automatically to trigger that second letdown and then go back to expression. So it repeats the massage, expression, without you even having to think about it. And that way you can get a little bit more out of the time you're spending pumping.
Yeah, that's amazing. I don't think I've heard of that before on a pump. And I'm just like sitting here, like picturing a nursing session with baby and like they kind of fall asleep and then they're like, oh, wait, I want some more. And they wake up and then you have another letdown. And I could see that being something that you would really benefit from as far as milk supply with a pump that could do that as well.
Yes, exactly. Just trying to take advantage of all those hormone fluctuations and all the ways that our babies know exactly how to influence our milk supply. We're just trying to mimic that with the pump setting.
Awesome. Okay. So then you mentioned that, you do classify it as a secondary pump. What kind of guidance would you give people that are trying to decide, what pump is right for them, based on whether they're pumping full time or using it occasionally or, lifestyle, things like that? Do you, especially in your work in private practice, I'm sure you see a lot of people wondering what they should get.
Oh, yes. I get this question a lot. And the truth is, when we do anything other than traditional flanges and that high quality double electric pump, like the Motif Luna, anything that doesn't have those traditional flanges and that powerful motor is really considered a secondary pump. Now, does that mean it's not going to work or it's not going to be effective? It's not going to have its place? Of course not. We know lots of people are using wearable and portable pumps, and many of them, are very successful at building and maintaining milk supply. But for most people, we want to rely on something that's a primary pump like the Luna to build and maintain a milk supply, and then use something like a wearable or portable pump, so a wearable like the Aura Glow, as that secondary option that we're using when we just can't drag out the big pump and the traditional flanges. So I have 4 kids. I could very easily see myself needing a wearable pump to be able to keep up with my other children if I were to have another baby, and that would be a perfect scenario to use this pump at those times when you just need to be hands-free. Maybe you're traveling, maybe you're at work, lots of different scenarios. And what I tell people is, if you're in a situation where you can't pull out that primary pump, then this would be a perfect option. A wearable like the Aura Glow would be a perfect option to complement for those times when you can't pull out your primary pump. And I do have lots of patients who kind of incorporate them from the beginning when they first introduce pumping. We tend to get a better result than if we only use one type of pump and then try to add another pump later. Sometimes it's about getting your body to be sort of conditioned to respond. So maybe adding in that wearable, if you know you're going to need it, adding it in when you first start introducing pumping into your journey.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I could see it being something that, keeps people nursing their baby just because they may not have pumped otherwise. Like you were saying, you get into a situation where you can't pull out that pump. So you just push off that pumping session, which I know I did with my second baby at work, and then my milk supply suffered. But maybe if I had had something like this, I would have been like, oh, let me just do this real quick while I finish this work or whatever. And I always tell people, block it on your calendar. Like, don't make exceptions. Don't miss a pumping session. But of course, things come up and it can be hard sometimes. So I love that there's just more options out there.
Yes, some milk removal is always better than no milk removal. So it's like, if we can only pump with a wearable, then by golly, let's get that wearable out. That's exactly what we need to do in that scenario. So yeah I love that encouragement that it might make things actually make that breastfeeding journey go a little bit further with the help of the tools that we have now.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I've loved everything that Motif has come out with. So I'm so excited for this new launch and to hear everyone's feedback from it. And I really appreciate you taking time to chat with me today about the new Aura Glow.
Yes, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity.
Thank you so much again to Josie for sharing her story. You can find her show notes page by going to thebirthhour.com and just searching for her name in the search bar. And if you want to check out the Aura Glow, as well as all the other great products from Motif Medical, head over to motifmedical.com/birthhour. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, head to thebirthhour.com and click Become a Member to pledge your support. And as a thank you, you'll get an invitation to join our private Facebook group and access to exclusive episodes. Your vote of confidence and support means the world to me.